Hi everyone, today I will be answering May-June 2018. We'll be doing the case study in this video. We're going to start with section A, and this is the case study. You can pause here if you would like to read it yourself, but let's otherwise go through it together. So I like to highlight as I read. Banking and unemployment in Morocco. Moroccan's banking industry has been described as one of the best in Africa. It has some of Africa's largest commercial banks, but 3 out of 19 control more than 2/3 of the market. So this tells me here that there's monopolies in the African market. These 3 have grown mostly through mergers, and as expected, more mergers will occur between Moroccan banks in the future. The banks make use of the brand names, set their own interest rates on loans, and provide some different services. So they set their own interest rates on loans, and they provide some different services. The larger banks tend to lend to large firms, so they lend. Small and medium-sized firms find it more difficult to get loans. More than 60% of the population now makes use of the services of commercial banks. The proportion of families opening savings accounts at commercial banks is increasing. So 60% and opening savings accounts. Moroccan banks now have branches in 22 African countries, as well as a number of European countries. They are now expanding in Morocco, creating more jobs. So they're expanding and creating jobs. Morocco has a relatively high unemployment rate. So a high unemployment rate. Figure 1 shows the unemployment rate in 2015 in a range of African countries, including Benin, a relatively poor country. Benin has a large labor-intensive subsistence farming sector, so labor-intensive farming sector. Figure 1 also shows youth unemployment and population growth. Unemployment rates vary between different groups. Youth unemployment is often twice the rate of overall unemployment rate. So youth unemployment rate is often twice the rate of the overall unemployment rate. So let's look at figure 1. It shows the unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate, and population growth rate in select African countries in 2015. So as we can see, Egypt has the highest youth unemployment rate overall. It also has the highest unemployment rate as well. But their population growth isn't as much as Uganda. In Morocco, the population is increasing at a faster rate than new jobs are being created. The rising unemployment rate is affecting wage rates in the country. As with unemployment, wage rates vary between different groups. Older workers, for example, tend to be paid more than younger workers. So these are the questions. You can pause here and attempt them yourself, or you can see how I will attempt them and go through it with me. So let's look at the first question. Identify, using information from the text, 2 functions of a commercial bank. Okay, so you need the key here is that you need to use information from the extract. There are various functions of a commercial bank that we may know of, but they have specified that they want information from the text. Okay, so let's look back at the text and see if we can see anything here that tells us what the commercial bank does. So looking at the text, what are consumers able to do with the help of commercial banks? They are able to take out loans. They lend out to large firms. Okay, so they enable consumers to open savings accounts, right? So these are the things that are supported by the text. So we could include any of these examples. So over here, I'm going to include a number of examples. They provide savings accounts. They enable lending. Lending to who? Consumers. or individuals, as well as it said to large firms. That's supported by the text. Another one was they set interest rates on loans. So any two of these, because any two of these functions and you would get 2 marks. The next question is, explain using information from the extract 2 reasons why the banking market in Morocco is not an example of perfect competition. To answer this question, we need to have a clear understanding of what perfect competition is. So what that means is no individual seller can decide a price that is beyond that of the market, or what the market determines through the equilibrium of demand and supply. Another feature of perfect competition is that the product that is being sold or that we are discussing is completely homogeneous. Homogeneous means the same. So there's no distinction from between each seller's product. And because the products are completely similar, there's no need to advertise the product either, because there's already perfect competition and your product is no different from the next seller's. So in that sense, there usually is no brand name as such. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of an understanding of what perfect competition is, we go back to the extract and see whether this is supported by the passage or if there are elements of it that go against what I just described. So let's look at some of the points here. They set their own interest rates. That's red flag number 1. In perfect competition, no seller is able to set their own rates. The rates, in fact, are completely determined by the market forces of demand and supply. So this suggests us that it's not perfect competition. Another one is that 3 out of 19 control more than 2/3 of the market. That point here suggests that there are monopolies prevalent. And so again, that does not support the notion of perfect competition. Over here, it says the banks provide a range of different services. In perfect competition, the service or the product is completely homogeneous. There should be no difference when it comes to services between different banks. And another thing I see here is that it says the banks make use of brand names. If it was perfect competition, there would be no reason to brand your product or advertise it. Advertising or brand distinction doesn't really happen in perfectly competitive markets. So these points suggest that it is not perfect competition. So we need to mention any 2 from these. So coming back to the question, I want you to notice that this question, the prompt says explain, okay? And that's different to the last question, where in part A, they only ask you to identify. That proves why this is only for 2 marks, whereas this question would be for 4 marks. Because in part A, you're only asked to state a point, whereas in part B, you're expected to state and also explain what that point means. So you have to go into a slightly more detail, which doubles the marks. So point 1 could be 3 banks control over 2/3 of the market. So that would be your point. You've just stated it. And when you go into explanation, what does that mean? This would mean that 3 banks that control over 2/3 of the market would suggest that there are monopolies. So a monopoly would mean that there isn't perfect competition in this market. So that's the point. And then you've now explained it. So that's 2 marks. Okay. Point number 2 could be the banks use brand names. Okay, so this would give you 1 mark, but you have to explain what that means and why this suggests that it's not perfect competition. The fact that banks use brand names mean that they are aiming to advertise, okay, and distinguish themselves against other banks. This suggests that they're trying to create brand loyalty, okay? Create brand loyalty. And this would not be necessary if it were perfect competition. Another point could be that they set their own interest rates, which suggests that it's not perfect competition because firms in perfect competitions get their prices from the market forces of demand and supply. They do not set their own prices. Some of you might have the question, well, this is talking about interest rates. Interest rates aren't prices. When the service is banking, interest rate is considered the price of borrowing money. So in this instance, interest rate becomes the price of borrowing money. So it is the same thing. Okay, it just has a special name. The fourth point would be that they're offering different services, offering a variety of services. So that would give you 1 mark. The explanation would be this suggests that the product is not homogeneous. Product, or in this instance, the service, is not homogeneous, therefore not perfect competition, because in perfect competition, the product is identical to other sellers. So you have to choose 2 of these points with the explanation to get a total of 4 marks. Let's go to the next question. Analyze why a commercial bank may prefer to sell its services in foreign countries rather than its home country. So the key word here is analyze. To analyze something means that you write about the issue in depth and in a structured way. So what you want to do is you're supposed to talk about why the commercial banks may, for various reasons, want to offer services in foreign countries rather than in the domestic home country. So in order to answer this question, I'm going to first talk about what the aim of a commercial bank is. Because a commercial bank is a business, just as any commercial business is, the main motive is profit. Profit itself is made up of the difference between price and cost. So profit is actually made when you minus cost from the price. So I'm going to base my entire argument on this premise that maybe the banks can make more money in the foreign countries than they would be able to make at home. Why would this be? Let's consider a few points that would prove this. One possible reason for this is that maybe demand for banking services are higher in the foreign countries. Higher in foreign countries. I'm going to give this abbreviation of FC. So that's one possible reason, that due to an increase in demand, this would push up the profit for the firm. What are some of the points that would push down the cost of banking services? So maybe cost of production, so COP, cost of production, would be lower in foreign countries. This could be maybe because of better technology. This could be sources due to sources of cheap labor. There could be lower rates of tax. Another possibility is that there's higher productivity in the foreign country. Why would that be? That could be possibly due to better education. So that's another reason. You could also look at it from the other point of view. Why would they not want to produce in their home country? So reasons for not wanting to produce domestically could be due to high costs or higher costs in domestic country or domestic home country. So this is actually saying the same thing as lower costs in the foreign country, but you can also phrase it like that. Maybe there are unfavorable domestic policies that make it hard to provide banking services locally. So maybe there are unfavorable domestic policies that discourage banking services. Okay. Oh, another reason why costs may be lower in a foreign country is maybe they provide subsidies, right? Subsidies are grants that lower the cost of production. So maybe subsidies are provided by the foreign government. Provided by foreign country. Okay. Another point to mention is that maybe they're trying to diversify. So if they provide their services elsewhere, this could help spread out the risks of only being in one location. So selling services abroad would lower risk due to diversification. So in this analysis question, you should mention ideally 2 to 3 points with an explanation and a sound argument as to why a commercial bank will choose to provide its services elsewhere versus in their own home country. Next question. Analyze whether the information in figure 1 supports the view that, part 1, countries with high population growth rates have a high unemployment rate. Part 2, the youth unemployment rate is usually twice that of the overall unemployment rate. So let's go back to the figure and see if this is true. So we have to look at if the countries with the highest rate of population growth also have the highest unemployment rate. So if you look at this table, we find that the information does not support this notion, because look at the countries with the highest rate of population growth, Uganda and Benin. And then you look at their unemployment rate and it's actually the lowest from amongst the groups, right? So they have the highest rate of population growth, yet the lowest rate of unemployment. So this is not supported. So in the answer, we will write no, generally this isn't true. The countries with the highest rate of population growth, such as Uganda and Benin, actually have the lowest unemployment rates. So I've given both my point, saying that it's not true, but I've also supported it with evidence. That's how I get both marks. So the second part asks us if the youth unemployment is generally about twice the rate of unemployment. From what I can see, this is generally true, because look at Morocco, for example. The youth unemployment is exactly twice that of the rate of unemployment. It's double. And generally, I can see that being a trend. For example, Benin as well, it looks like the youth unemployment is about double that of unemployment. In Nigeria as well, it looks about double. In Uganda as well, it looks about double. I wouldn't say it's exact, but it looks like it's about double. But in Egypt, I think Egypt is the only exception, because the youth unemployment is definitely more than double that of the overall unemployment rate. So I would say Egypt is the only exception here. So my answer would be generally yes. The evidence does support that youth unemployment is about double that of the unemployment rate. However, Egypt is the only exception, where the youth unemployment seems like it's way more than the unemployment rate. But other countries such as Morocco show that the unemployment rate is half that of the youth unemployment. Again, I gave the point and the supporting evidence to get both marks. E. Discuss whether or not older workers are always paid more than younger workers. The key here is that this is a discuss question. Okay, so you have to discuss both sides on whether or not older workers are always paid more or not. Okay, so you have to have both sides. This is a discussion question. In a discussion question, you have to examine in detail to show meaning, identify elements, and the relationships between them. So this is how you answer a discuss question. So let's talk about reasons why they would be paid more. One assumption is that workers would probably have been with the firm that they're working for a longer time period. Which means that they would probably have gained promotions over time, right? So we have to write the points that link to this. It probably means they have gained or developed skills over time. It could mean they have gained experience over time. Which means that they would be more efficient. It could mean that they have undertaken training during their tenure. They could also have made it to higher positions in the company. So better. Lastly, they may be more productive. The fact that they're more productive could be based on all of these things, such as experience, but it could also be based on the fact that they have more training, more education. So this would help them be more skilled and more productive with time. Let's now talk about the other side, about why older workers may not be paid more than younger workers. Some of the suggestions could be that actually, with time, older workers become more lethargic and therefore may actually become less productive than before. So they may become old fashioned in their thinking and therefore not be able to think outside the box, are not updated with the new technologies. So therefore they lack the new ideas necessary to make them productive. Another point could be actually that they have less education than what is required in the present time. So whatever information or education that they had in the past is no longer relevant. Then we can talk about occupational and geographical mobility. So when it comes to, they could be either geographically or occupationally immobile. Geographic immobility is when they're less able to move from one location to another, and occupational mobility is that they're less able to switch jobs to find something that is better. Okay, so for both reasons, they may not be able to move to another job that could actually pay them more. So in order to gain the full 5 marks, you need to talk about both sides. And actually, if you're going to talk about one side, you would be able to gain a maximum of 3 marks in total. It is true that often older workers are paid more in wages than a younger employee is. However, there are instances where this may not be true. The main reason why an older employee is likely to be paid more is linked to the fact that they have probably been working for longer. This would mean that they would have gained more experience, over time, gain more skills and more on the job training that would make them more productive employees. They may have also received more promotions over time, as they may have been working at the same occupation for extended periods. On the other hand, there are some reasons why an older employee may actually get paid less in comparison to younger ones. The older employees may have outdated ideas and training that inhibit them to come up with new ideas that would actually hinder their productivity. Furthermore, the longer they spend at the same occupation, the more they become geographically and occupationally immobile, making getting better and more high paying jobs quite difficult. Part F. Explain using information from the extract one reason why a relatively poor country may have a low unemployment rate. Let's go back to the extract and see if we can find an explanation for this. So if we look at Benin, Benin's a relatively poor country, but its unemployment rate is relatively low as well. So I want to look at the information in the extract and see if there's anything that would explain this. And I can see that I've already highlighted that Benin has a large labor intensive subsistence farming sector. So it ends up employing a lot of people in agriculture. And because agriculture is very labor intensive versus capital intensive, it may be the reason for why a lot of people are just hired in this field of work. Furthermore, because Benin is a relatively poor country, they may not be able to afford the technology that could replace labor and may be even more efficient. So a lot of poorer countries um, stick to labor because it's affordable. So that's the reason I'm going to give when I answer this question. So the first reason that I'm going to give, and it's the main reason, is that a large number of the population is employed in agriculture. The explanation, as the extract even states, is that agriculture is very labor intensive. What are the possible reasons for agriculture being labor intensive? The fact is that in poorer countries, labor actually may be more affordable versus more expensive capital or technology. Furthermore, a lot of people may be employed in agriculture because it does not require much education or training. In a poor country such as Benin, a large number of the population is employed in agriculture. This field of work is quite labor intensive. This may be due to the fact that labor is relatively cheaper as compared to technology. Furthermore, to be employed in this field of work does not require a lot of education or training and therefore can employ a lot of people. This is why, although the country may be poor, the employment rate may be low as well. Discuss whether or not commercial banks in Morocco would benefit from further mergers. As this is a discuss question, we need to talk about both sides. On one hand, why they would benefit from further mergers, and on the other hand, why they would not. The first point can relate to the fact that if they were to merge and the resultant firm would be bigger, they would give the banks more market power. So they would have a greater share of the overall market. So the next point is that this is a relatively quick way to grow a company as compared to if you were to grow it yourself organically. That would probably take a lot of time, but this is considered a faster way of becoming bigger. The next point relates to the fact that they now have a greater control of the market, which means that they could act somewhat like a monopoly and raise the prices without having to lose too many customers, because now the customers don't have the firm itself doesn't have too much competition. So if they were to raise their price, they could do so without losing too many customers. This could actually count as 2 points if you think about it. So one is that they can raise their prices, and the second is that they won't lose their customers if they do so. The next point is that this kind of merger could actually be a horizontal merger, which means that you are joining forces on the same line of production, which means that they could actually end up benefiting from economies of scale. And once you've talked about economies of scale, there's a number of examples that you could give of economies of scale. So let's talk about all of them. What are the different kinds of economies of scale? There is lower average cost, lower prices, buying economies of scale, managerial economies of scale, and all of this could lead to eventually higher profit. Now let's talk about why the merger may actually not be so good for the company or for the banks. The first point is that when a company becomes too big, they may start becoming complacent. Complacency is when you feel like there's no one that can threaten your position and you become too comfortable. And because you're comfortable, you do not take steps that help you maintain that power or help keep you on top. Right? So you're not trying to keep your costs low, you're not trying to keep the customers loyal. You start to lose your edge slowly with time because you're not on your toes. Okay. The next point relates to diseconomies of scale. Diseconomies of scale, it's disadvantages that relate to a company producing at such a mass scale that they start losing out on keeping their costs low. So now, actually, instead of their costs being low, they suffer from higher average costs. And because of the higher cost, they may find a reduction in demand. They may actually lose out on profit. When we talk about diseconomies of scale, there are problems such as managerial diseconomies of scale. There's communication problems. There may become internal struggles. So the overall problem is that the costs may actually result in lower profit overall or profit falling. There may be other costs associated with a merger, which may not necessarily be financial, but which include loss of morale, because if a company becomes too big, sometimes people lose communication and they lose a sense of motivation, and they no longer are connected to the overall purpose of the company, so they start becoming demotivated. Okay. Another thing is that larger companies sometimes lose customers because they start losing that personal touch. A larger company may not be able to have that one-on-one connection with the customer that sometimes is very important in customer service. So that is another thing that might happen. So you need to talk about both sides. If you were only able to talk about one side, you would get a maximum of 4 marks in total. But if you have a good representation of both sides of the argument, you would get your full 6 marks. A merger is when 2 or more businesses combine their operations, and the result is a bigger firm with larger operations. If commercial banks in Morocco were to merge, there would be a number of possible benefits. However, there are a few dangers to consider as well. Mergers are a relatively quick way for a business to expand. The resultant firm will then have a bigger share of the market. Because of this, it may be possible for the bank to raise their prices without losing too many of their customers, as there would be a lack of competition. Perhaps the greatest benefit is the fact that the firm may benefit from economies of scale, which will bring down the average cost for businesses. On the other hand, there are a few dangers associated with merging businesses. There may be a clash in cultures or management styles. which may cause unrest amongst the employees. They may also feel disconnected in the bigger company and lose purpose and motivation. Moreover, the company may become complacent due to the lack of competitive pressure, which would also cause a lack of motivation to maintain their position. Lastly, the firm may actually suffer from diseconomies of scale, driving up the average cost for the commercial bank. Thus, the firm should decide whether the benefits would likely outweigh the drawbacks in their position. So you only need to mention about 2 to 3 points on each side to get all your marks for this question. So that's the end of this video, which was a case study. The next part will be section 2, which is the essay questions. Thank you, everyone.